Yes, thank you for inviting me to present this, I think, fairly significant project. Certainly, it's very significant for our client. My name is Kate Gerson, and I'm an architect at DIALOG in Vancouver, in BC. And I'm the project architect for the First Nations Health Authority Metro Vancouver office project. Recognizing that we are from different parts of the world, in case any of you are not familiar with the term, in Canada, we generally refer to the Indigenous population as First Nations. I will refer to the First Nations Health Authority as FNHA for short, and they refer to this project as MVOP. For Metro Vancouver Office Project. So when you hear me say MVOP, that's what I'm talking about. So I'd like to start with an acknowledgement that I'm located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and particularly the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations in the Vancouver region. And we thank them for sharing their lands with us. I also acknowledge that the First Nations Health Authority represents all First Nations in the province. The establishment of the FNHA is one very important step for BC's First Nations toward taking back some control of their people's lives, lands, and cultural traditions that have been challenged through colonization. It has been a huge privilege to work with the FNHA and assist them in the development of this important project. I also give particular acknowledgement to the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, the Takaya or Wolf Clan, as they call themselves, and they're self-described as people of the inlet, on whose land the project is situated. Many generations of the Tsleil-Waututh have lived and thrived in this area, due in no small part to an abundance of resources. So they have a sacred trust, a responsibility to care for and restore their traditional territory to its former state. Their stewardship of the land, air, and water is deeply ingrained in their culture because they understand the health of their people is interconnected with the environment that they inhabit. Now, for disclaimers for myself, I'm not at all an expert. My experience working on First Nation projects is limited to this one and the background research that we did as we developed the design of this project. As well, this is the first mass timber project of this scale that I have worked on. So for those of you that are architects or future architects, this is a reminder that every project throughout one's career provides new, fresh opportunities. The project is a new office building for the FNHA, who currently are spread across diverse spaces in a number of office buildings in downtown Vancouver, as well as in West Vancouver, in a building that is on First Nations reservation land. The primary goal of the project is to consolidate the FNHA administrative functions to foster better collaboration. Also to contribute to financial stability by owning their own building rather than paying downtown Vancouver rental rates. The new building will be a 5-story administration office, providing over 9,000 square meters or 97,000 square feet of occupied space, built over 2.5 levels of underground parking. The new office will accommodate approximately 425 staff. It was originally conceived to be 350 staff, but since COVID, it's now, they're cramming more people into it because people's work styles have changed. As previously mentioned, the building is located on lands of the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. Aside from the benefit of the First Nations supporting one another, there's an added benefit that in Canada, for any First Nations staff who have their employment situated on First Nations reserve land, then their employment income tax is exempt. The building is currently under construction and scheduled to be complete this year. So a bit about the FNHA. The FNHA is the health and wellness partner to over 200 diverse First Nations communities and citizens across BC. The FNHA is the first and so far only provincial First Nations health authority in Canada. They work with BC First Nations, government partners, and others to improve health outcomes for BC First Nations people. They plan, design, manage, deliver, and fund the delivery of First Nations health programs in BC. They incorporate and promote First Nations knowledge, beliefs, values, practices, medicines, and models of health and healing into the First Nations health programs, recognizing that these may be reflected differently in different regions of BC. They enhance collaboration among First Nations health providers and other health providers to address economies of scale service delivery issues to improve efficiencies and access to healthcare. They carry out research and policy development in the area of First Nations health and wellness. As mentioned, the FNHA's clientele consists of over 200 diverse First Nations communities and citizens across BC. This ranges, for those of you that don't recognize, this is a map of British Columbia. This ranges from very remote communities in the far reaches of the province to the challenges faced by the inner city Vancouver Indigenous population. They have the province divided into 5 regions with diverse cultural traditions. Each region has its own administrative structure. Recognizing the diverse geographies and resultant cultural traditions is represented in the different colors assigned to each region in their branding strategies. This is also an important consideration, of course, in the operations of the FNHA and in the architectural expression of the building that they'll be inhabiting. For those members of the audience who have a particular interest in public health, I encourage you to take a look at the FNHA website to learn more about this very interesting and impressive organization. And of course, because I'm an architect, the rest of this presentation will really be around the architecture of the project. Early in the design process, the design team worked with a design advisory committee that comprised of FNHA staff representatives of various departments and serving a variety of functions. Cultural workshops led us to identifying lists of cultural values that were important to guide the design of the building, including regional differences, the need to represent the whole province, the 5 regions and their differences, but recognizing that because the building is on Tsleil-Waututh Coast Salish land, the exterior of the building has more of a Coast Salish focus to it architecturally. Stewardship of the land, the importance of wood, especially cedar, the importance of salmon, especially to the coastal regions where the building is located, other food traditions such as edible plants, berries, other sea life, etc. Significance of the number 4, which is partly around 4 seasons, partly around the 4 cardinal directions. The strong indoor-outdoor relationship is considered very important. And supporting ceremonial traditions such as a need to for a gathering space to face east for morning prayer, providing a fire pit in some capacity, smudging to allow for smudging. So one space has enhanced exhaust system to allow for smudging, and being able to gather in circles. So some of the traditions to be supported. So these considerations were synthesized into a project vision statement and set of design principles used to reference throughout the design process. So the overarching vision statement for the project reads, the FNHA Metro Vancouver office honors the spirit of its place and the relationship with the Tsleil-Waututh clan, into which all FNHA staff have been adopted. as a first of its kind province-wide entity founded through the expression of BC First Nations, self-determination and health governance. The FNHA office is welcoming to and celebrates all First Nations in BC. The FNHA office embodies a commitment to economic, environmental, and cultural sustainability. This vision is supported by the following design principles that helped give direction to the design as it evolved and acts as a guiding framework when difficult decisions and compromises need to be made. So we tend to do this at least on all our public projects, where we start by defining a vision and design principles to help guide the projects. So in this case, creating a place of healing and wellness, and that it must be welcoming to all nations of the province, and yet honoring of the place and context of the Tsleil-Waututh Takaya Wolf clan, cultivating a sense of family in order to foster community engagement and collaboration, to tread lightly on the land, respecting environmental stewardship, and resilience. The lifespan of the building is anticipated to be around 75 years. So like with any project, there were competing priorities that had to be balanced as we developed the design. So one important issue was, although this building is very important to the FNHA, they also have many little nursing stations and facilities across the province, and they mustn't be seen to be pouring all their money into this nice new headquarters and at the sacrifice of their other facilities in all the communities that they support. Although environmental sustainability was considered important, economic and cultural sustainability were really equally important to them. So finding a balance between supporting the cultural traditions versus the day-to-day doing of business, because really when it comes down to it, it's basically an office building. And again, representing the Coast Salish peoples where the building is situated versus all of BC, and recognizing the regional differences. Respecting environmental sustainability and wellness, being functional and yet flexible, again, given the 75-year lifespan, encouraging interconnection and collaboration, and active design, encouraging people, for example, to use the stairs, etc. Optimizing access to natural light, so taking the building orientation and floor plan proportions into consideration. We actually were able to influence the proportions of the site in order to optimize the exposure and daylight. So this is the project site, located in North Vancouver, which is a suburb of Vancouver, again on Tsleil-Waututh land. There's actually, you can get a sense of a line here, south of which is Tsleil-Waututh land, and north of which is North Vancouver district. So as you can see, the site is located in what's currently otherwise an undeveloped area, directly south of this Takaya Golf Center. The road, in fact, needed to be extended in order to provide access to the site. And it will be further extended in the near future to support further development of this local area here, as well as connecting to an existing neighborhood that is to the east of this. So some of the significant site characteristics that we took into consideration included that there's quite a significant topography. There's about a 13 meter, which is about 40 foot difference in elevation from the northeast corner of the site to the southwest corner of the site. So there's quite a slope to it. As you saw, there's very little context currently to help guide the design. There are pretty spectacular views once one is above the treetops. And so these are the views in all directions, looking to the mountains in the north, looking toward downtown Vancouver off in the distance, to the southwest, and to the Burrard Inlet, which is a very important waterway to the Tsleil-Waututh, directly to the south. The sun exposure, of course, was taken into consideration and helped guide the building orientation. Aside from an understanding of the site, another pre-design endeavor was to get a deeper understanding of different building traditions of the BC First Nations, and with particular attention to the Coast Salish building traditions, given that this is on Coast Salish land. The traditional Coast Salish plank house is a shed-roofed cedar plank structure. Plank houses typically had a long rectangular floor plan and were built with support poles for wall planks and heavier posts for roof beams, clad in horizontal cedar planks. These plank houses served as permanent structures during the winter months. In early spring, these same structures were partially dismantled, the planks removed and transported over water by a canoe for use as components for the temporary summer structures, leaving the post and beam superstructure in place. The Coast Salish plank houses were usually unadorned on the exterior, but tended to have more embellishment in the interior, mainly limited to carving and/or painting of the posts. Early in the development of design concepts, it became clear that the plank house tradition was a very comfortable fit as a starting point for the expression of the office block, being the upper floors of the building. Working with the challenging topography and the understanding that the Tsleil-Waututh are people of the inlet, the main public floor was conceived as boulders or islands in the inlet. The boulders containing the functional spaces, i.e. meeting, eating, training spaces, and the water being the circulation around those spaces. Given the importance of wood to First Nations culture in the province, and given the simplicity and regularity of the office floor plates, it was decided early on that this was a particularly perfect candidate to be a mass timber structure. This was well supported by the client group, even through the stresses of meeting construction budgets, recognizing the cultural value of an exposed mass timber structure. So the mass timber structure made it through several value engineering exercises during the evolution of the project. Other early decisions included working with the significant topography of the site. So locating the entrance to the underground parking at the low point of the site at the southwest corner, and the main formal entrance one level up on the north side of the site. So locating the main entrance on the north side, the main floor level is set to meet the street elevation, roughly centered along the north edge of the site. It was, in terms of setting the height of the building on the site, it was sort of a bit of a competition between the relationship of this quite steep street and the main entrance, but not wanting outdoor spaces that are on the south side of the site being too much kind of buried into a pit in the site, working with the topography. Level access to underground parking and staff amenities off the west street at the P1 level. So there's also, aside from the parkade entrance, there is a staff entrance at this level. Locating the primary meeting, gathering, and eating facilities on the main floor. Creating a strong indoor-outdoor relationship, particularly at the main floor. So there's quite a flow through of them from the main entrance through the main lobby to an outdoor gathering space, and this main cultural gathering space that we call the Great Hall opens right up at the two ends again to the outdoor spaces. So this is the resulting main floor plan. One boulder being, quote unquote, boulder being the meeting house where the main boardrooms are. One boulder being a sort of nourishment, a wellness center, essentially, accommodating the food services as well as a wellness clinic. One boulder being the main gathering spaces, or what we refer to as the Great Hall. And then lastly, this boulder, which at the east end of the site is also tucked into the hill, contains mainly support spaces. The office floors, in contrast, were to be very, very simple and flexible. The proportions of the office floor plate to provide, oh, I just lost my spot here. Were to provide good access to daylight at all working areas. So we worked with having an optimum dimension of 9 meters, or about 30 feet from the core elements out to the exterior face, so that all workspaces would have good access to daylight. Sorry, I got distracted here. I lost my notes. Having a centrally located open interconnecting stair between all occupied floors to encourage active use and collaboration. And yes, the stair is going to be bright red, featuring the mass timber structure on the office levels, exposing the columns, beams, and underside of cross-laminated timber floors, slabs at the ceilings wherever practical. And that led to a decision to provide a raised access floor system at all the office floors to support the air, power, and data distribution. And that allowed us to keep the ceilings much more free of services, and because things will be fed through the access floor down and up from that space. And it also, of course, supports ease of future reconfiguration, so makes for a much more flexible building. So this is another strategy that, again, made it through the value engineering exercises. It is a much more expensive way to do things, but it does allow for more flexibility. And again, because the client really valued the wood structure and recognize the value of keeping it as clean of services as possible, they understood the value of having that raised floor system. And then it was an early decision again to provide a roof deck at the top floor of the building for all staff to be able to enjoy. So it's quite a significant roof deck. It's quite large and has a large covered portion to it as well, because in our climate, one can comfortably be outdoors, but it might be raining. So in order to even be able to support having meetings on the exterior, there's a large covered area to this roof deck. So this is the resultant floor plan of a typical office floor, including the open feature stair interconnecting all floors, located here. Central core that accommodate the more fixed and enclosed elements, including exit stairs and elevators, the washrooms, and storage and service rooms, as well as a large mechanical shaft that runs through the office floors. A primary hub was developed around the central interconnecting stair, where chance encounters are most likely to happen, where people are either coming off the elevator or coming up and down the stairs. And so in support of this hub, there's a coffee area on each floor in this location, located directly off this central stair area. Around this core on each floor is a circulation spine to access the open work areas, as well as the contained spaces of the core. Located directly off the central feature stair elevator lobby are primary shared meeting rooms on every floor, with a balance of open office areas stretching on the north and south sides, broken up by some small clusters of small breakout and focus rooms. So the more workspaces are open, the more one needs small breakout spaces for being able to have focused meetings and just doing focused work. And that way it also helps to break up these big expanses of workstations. As touched on previously, the main inspiration for the exterior expression of the office block is the traditional Coast Salish plank house. The quote-unquote planks are, in this case, formed of a profiled aluminum composite panel cladding. The planks fold up to become horizontal solar shades provided to the windows on the south, east, and west facades. The swoop transition of the plank to solar shade is a shape that loosely recalls form line traditions of Pacific Northwest First Nations art. The shared meeting rooms on each floor of the typical floors are marked on the exterior by large round openings in the facade directly above the main entrance, which is just below these windows. So this is a rendering of the resultant composition with the 4 stories of the mass timber plank house office block supported by the main floor boulders, which you can just sort of see the one main meeting house boulder here. The large round windows, which highlight the main meeting rooms of the office floors, also help to mark the main entrance building, which is directly below them. The below grade structure and up to the main floor slab is concrete, supporting the mass timber structure above. So this north-south building section also shows the interconnecting stair, of course, the flow through at the main lobby. So this is the main entrance here, and you can see right through the lobby to an main outdoor gathering space on the south side of the building. And this is the massing of the Great Hall, forming one edge of that outdoor gathering space. And then the meeting spaces above and the raised access floor system on each floor. This east-west section gives you a bit of a sense of the way the building is nestled into the hill. So the low point at the site on the left provides easy access to the underground parking, as well as to staff amenities that include a fitness and end-of-trip facility and bike parking. And on the right, you can see how the main floor is tucked into the hillside, this being the main floor here. I'll just touch on the interior design concepts. In the spirit of health through wellness, the interior design concept was developed in conjunction with the architecture and landscape teams and inspired by the FNHA First Nations traditional foods fact sheets. Information gathered about seafood, regional berries, edible roots, and game animals help to inform the floors of the building, which represent the 5 FNHA regions of the province. The food metaphor layers in elements of texture, color, and abstraction with the hope of reflecting new approaches and layers of meaning into the walls of the building's fabric. This upper left view is what will be seen when first entering the building through the main entrance from the north. There are 4 glulam wood columns and the beams between them that will frame the support and support the central interconnecting stair. And you can get a bit of a sense of the flow through to outdoor space in behind that stair, right through this main lobby. And then the lower view is of the Great Hall, which is the main gathering space, again, prominently featuring the wood structure. And touching on the landscape design, the landscape design also celebrates the Tsleil-Waututh people's deep connection to nature, from the waters of Burrard Inlet and Indian Arm to the rainforests of the North Shore Mountains, and inspired the use of rocks, water, and native plants that accentuate spirit of place. The landscape design's organizational geometry respects and enhances the building's major architectural expression, and is designed to inspire and be inviting to staff and visitors through all seasons. Collectively creating a welcoming, inclusive, and restorative place for staff and visitors. Site elements include the main outdoor gathering space with a pergola and fire pit to support their cultural gatherings. Spaces for formal programmed activity as well as spontaneous gathering, meetings, socialization, and relaxation. Front door forecourt with accessible drop-off and seating. Opportunities for incorporating art, including a location for a welcome post here. And there were thoughts around potentially the fire pit and the pergola becoming art pieces, but that proved to be too much of a challenge to orchestrate with the client group. Covered outdoor areas to maximize usage in the Pacific Northwest climate. So this rectangle is the outline of the office block that sits above this, with some space for outdoor gathering here, and then of course again on the top level, on the roof deck. Lush, diverse native plants, including edible and medicinal plants, celebrating Indigenous teachings and the site's local ecology. So there's a berry patch here and other plantings that do represent other medicinal and native plantings. And there will be signage to explain them, so that when experiencing the landscape, one can also learn about the plants around the building. A building perimeter walking loop for activity and connection to the landscaping. So one can go through the building here to the exterior, but also there's a walkway navigating the elevation changes, walkway around the building. One can actually do a full circuit around, going up and over the main floor that's tucked into the hill here and around the whole building. And as well, there's a bioswale feature demonstrating rainwater management. So there will be water that comes off the main roof that will go into a bioswale at this point here at the high point of the site. And that bioswale goes along the north edge and down this west edge, and then eventually into a catch basin in this corner. And there's a large stormwater retention tank under this part of the site. And all this hopefully will result in a rich landscape of outdoor gathering spaces and pathways surrounding the building, encouraging an active interface with the building. Much thought was also put into opportunities to integrate art into the architecture of the project. Several types of art display were discussed, including art integrated into the architecture, i.e. built in, displaying of FNHA's own art collection amassed through donations and acquisitions, and temporary displays providing opportunities to feature both up-and-coming young as well as established First Nations artists from all over the province. So in that consideration, a number of opportunities to build art pieces into the architecture were identified, both interior and exterior. In the end, for practical reasons, it was necessary to limit these to art that could be applied to the structure rather than integral. So some examples include, again, the location of a welcome post in the landscaping, carved cedar doors to the main entrance doors to the main meeting rooms and the Great Hall, location of 5 columns in the Great Hall, 5 columns that will be exposed at the front wall of the Great Hall. Each will represent one region of the province, and those regions are being given the opportunity to apply an art piece to that column. There will be a digital display in the main lobby that will accommodate a land acknowledgement as well as other either artwork or information about the FNHA and about the Tsleil-Waututh where the building is located. There will be carved columns and beams that frame the main entrance vestibule to the building, and an art loop on the main floor with walls to display changing exhibits. And as well, each office floor represents a region, and our opportunities have been identified on each floor where regionally significant imagery can be featured. So the main entrance vestibule, which you can just see here, sort of, is framed at the exterior by a portal of columns and beam. Those are currently being carved as we speak. So the original idea was that they be carved, the actual structural columns, but for practical reasons, instead, we changed them to steel so that they're as small as they can be, and then they will be wrapped with the carvings. And as you can see, the art loop will be very visible from the main entrance of the building. So in closing, I'm just, as I mentioned, the project is currently under construction, and here are just a very few shots of the construction progress. We're in a very wet climate here, so it was difficult to get photos that aren't covered in a lot of tarps. But this gives you an idea of the actual typical office floors and the exposed mass timber structure. And this is where it has progressed further. So this is a typical office floor where there will be air distribution and a lot of all the power and data running within the raised floor. So the raised floor system will be then set on top of all these services running within the floor space. And this is what the building looked like about 2 or 3 weeks ago on the exterior. We're very anxious to see what the cladding will look like in the end. But on the right here, what you can see are, it's a mock-up of the cladding system. It's very challenging for them to create the profiles of the cladding. So we've gone through quite a process of having them mock it up and make some corrections to the mock-up so that we could set the standard of what the cladding system should look like in the end. So that gives you a bit of a sense of the process that we go through in seeing the design turning it gradually into reality. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Kate. It was a wonderful presentation. So I'm going to actually ask with a very broad question, because this class is focused on health and equity in architecture. And the reason that we invited you is that, this is actually a project that was designed for a community to bring a sense of community and an identity. So in a way, it's all about social health and community health. So can you talk about these aspects of the project, when it comes to the community health and social health, and and especially how the target audience was involved in the design process?
Sure. So I guess a couple of things. As I mentioned, they had to find a balance between creating a beautiful building and really supporting kind of their cultural traditions, but not looking too much like that they poured all their money into this building. So that they at the sacrifice of supporting the communities that they're supporting. So that was one challenge definitely that they faced in the process. But definitely supporting collaboration, but also, so it was important that all their clientele essentially feel very welcome in this building. So people coming from all over the province will be coming to this building for meetings. So representing the whole province again was important to them. So I think I kind of touched on those things as I presented, and that we did work with this design advisory committee that had representatives of their staff from all over the province and kind of all levels of staff and working for different departments. So we had quite a range of points of view.
Thank you. Hernan?
Just a very basic question. Were there any considerations or other plans to go through WELL certification?
We did consider it, and there certainly were some aspects of it that definitely we took into consideration. In the end, we didn't go for WELL certification. We didn't go for LEED certification. The two certifications that we went after, because they were very important to the client. One was for accessibility. In Canada, we have a Rick Hansen Foundation does an accessibility certification of buildings. And so that's one thing that they wanted to go after. And then there's a salmon safe certification on basically on the Pacific Northwest region, both in the US and in Canada, to make sure that that the building will not in any way sort of compromise considering the runoff from the building, et cetera, to not compromise the salmon in the streams in the region. And so again, that was very important, especially to the Tsleil-Waututh. So those were the two that we went after. One thing I'll say about WELL was that we had a discussion with this design advisory committee very early on about whether to have operable windows or not. And to my surprise, they decided not to have operable windows, which immediately cut us out of WELL, because that's one mandatory aspect of the WELL system, is to be able to have enough control of your space by being able to open windows. But they felt that it can potentially create more conflict, because with open office areas, the person next to the window has control of a window and others might not want it open, find it too drafty or whatever. So in the end, they decided it was easier to not have openable windows and just have very good ventilation system in the building instead. So that immediately cut us out of the ability to actually become WELL certified. But things like daylight, we did actually start out with the light system that I'm blanking out on the circadian light system, but that actually got value engineered in the end out of the project. But the active design, really encouraging people to use that interconnecting stair rather than the elevators, and having this loop around the building. So there were various considerations that we did.
How you doing? Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, you just mentioned that certain aspect was value engineered as far as like the lighting aspect. Were there any other things that you wanted to involve in this building that end up getting value engineered?
Actually, so one thing that I have to commend the FNHA for was that no, there wasn't much compromise in the end. They kept increasing their budget instead to be able to support the design of the building. So I guess they really did value the building sufficiently that they were able to really accommodate. We did quite early on change the structural grid in order to reduce the thickness of the CLT panels, the cross-laminated timber floor system, to reduce the cost of the mass timber. So the columns and beams are closer together than they otherwise would have been. But it really, we felt we could do that without really making much of a compromise to the design. And that did save a fair amount of money, but yeah, no, they actually there were not huge compromises that we had to make in the end.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm the sole public health person here, so this is kind of public health in nature. I'm wondering, in making this space active and incorporating like those kind of wellness spaces, and maybe for social health as well, just that the coffee stations and things like that on every floor. I'm wondering if in this project there was any kind of collaboration with anyone in public health, or if these aspects of the building were just desired by the client and something that you added because they just simply wanted something like that.
Well, of course, the whole client is public health. So the design advisory committee really were public health specialists. So they did help guide us. But I think a lot of that also just came out of our sense of good design. So it certainly it was working in collaboration with the client who are public health experts themselves. So
hello, thank you for your talk. I had a question, but first I just wanted to share with the class that the images of the plank houses is one of very few images from that time period that still exist. And I did some work a few years ago for different communities, and the colonial settler architects who arrived in our part of what is now Canada were very instrumental in ridding the landscape of all of those examples of Indigenous architecture and discredited them. So it's really interesting to see how much influence you are taking from that type of structure, not just its outward appearance, but actually how it was used and put together to shape your design work. And it's such an important shift because obviously the local people were designing in a way that was completely compatible with the climate and materials here, and we ignored that for 150 years, only to come back to it now, which is great. But my question for you is that actually we haven't spent a lot of time talking about art as a tool, a design tool for health, and this is such a huge part of how you have decided your budget and organized the space. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that as part of the building.
Well, of course, art is hugely important to the First Nations, and I think they recognize also that it's a great way of expressing their cultural values to the world at large. So again, I have to give credit to the FNHA for valuing the art as much as they do. And so although there were challenges in really building art into the building itself, so as I said, in the end, for practical reasons, it's more applied to the building rather than really integrated into the structure of the building. But at least it was able to survive, and that they are working hard to work with artists to embellish the building in a way that will obviously make them feel more at home in it as well. So, so credit to the FNHA for valuing it and seeing it as an opportunity to also to really showcase the different cultural traditions of the different regions.
Yes, that's one final question. How would you use art in the structural design? Would that have been like in certain types of floor patterns, wall column type of details? I mean, structural column types of details. So I did notice you did try to use the exterior facade as almost like an art itself with the different types of plank designs and the circular window openings. But I guess what other ways would you have tried to involve art in the structural design?
Yeah, things like you mentioned. So I had fantasy, for example, of the lobby, the main floor lobby floor having a pattern in it, so that when you're looking down onto it from that interconnecting stair, you would see a pattern in it. And the guardrails around the stair could have been, had a design in them. Instead, they're going to be just solid steel, sheets of steel as the guardrails. I've always loved the idea of when you're going up a stair that you see the risers, you're looking really at the risers, and it would be lovely to have the risers of the stairs themselves potentially have a design on them, things like that in the end the client couldn't sort of wrap their head around dealing with the art aspect early enough in the process in order to get artists involved early on. So the one sort of built-in piece, aside from the columns that will be wrapped with their art at the main entrance, and the columns in the Great Hall that will have art pieces applied to them. The guardrails at the level 5 roof deck are glass, and there will be a design on a frit pattern applied to the glass that is a design that was done by one of the local artists. So that's the one piece that we did manage to actually get organized to be built in. But those were some of the other ideas that I had. We also were going to have the main doors into the main boardrooms and Great Hall to be carved cedar doors. But that hasn't happened either. So it could obviously happen in the future, but won't be the case for the time of the building opening.
Thank you so much again, Kate, for joining us and for the wonderful lecture.